We've all had those times where we go into a movie so excited to see it, only to leave unbelievably disappointed. So today I'm going to give you my picks for the 10 most disappointing movies of all time. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your picks for the 10 most disappointing movies of all time. Before we go into this, to be clear on terms, biggest disappointment doesn't mean worst movie. It means the movies with the biggest negative gap between where I thought they were going to be and where they ended up. It's even possible for a movie to still be good, but be on this list. One more thing before we get started. I have a companion video to this with 10 more of the movies that have disappointed me the most. So there's gonna be some movies that you're surprised aren't on this list. They're probably on that list, and let's get started. Kicking things off at number 10 is Glass. Now, I don't hate this movie. There's quite a few things about this movie that I enjoy, and when it first came out, I did give it a positive review, but none of that changes the fact that it is well below where I was hoping it would be, and certainly as I've had a year and a half to kind of think about the film, it just leaves me with so much disappointment. A big part of that is because I absolutely love the movie Unbreakable. I loved it when I first saw it in the theater, and here we are 20 years later. I still absolutely love that film. And when Split came out and let us know, wait, they're building towards a continuation to Unbreakable. We're going to see where David Dunn is at. I got so excited. I thought maybe M. Night Shyamalan is back. And then he gave us this movie that had some of what I wanted, and then really dropped the ball as you went into the third act. He tried to be clever, he tried to subvert our expectations, and instead took this character that I loved and closed out his character arc in about the most disappointing way possible, the most disrespectful way possible, that just leaves you with a sour taste in your mouth, being like, oh, gross. Why would you do that? Of all the things you could do, that's what he chose to do, and I still can't believe that this was the end to David Dunn's story. Number 9, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, this is one of my most unpopular opinions on my channel, but the reality is I went into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 so excited because the first movie was such a pleasant surprise. I loved the characters, the atmosphere, the vibe of these movies. I totally dug the trailers and wanted to see where they were going to go and what they were going to do with Kurt Russell. And then the film we got has never sat right with me. And the more I think about it, every time I rewatch it, I like it just a little bit less. Of the directions that James Gunn could have gone with these characters, I do not like what he decided to do. I don't like that he divided the team up. And once again, certain plot points in this film put a really bad taste in my mouth with the way that it treats Star-Lord's family and the fact that he had thousands of siblings that are dead. Just doesn't work for me. I don't enjoy it. And so this is a movie that has some positive elements, but it is well below what I thought it could and should have been. Next up is Speed 2 Cruise Control. Now, the original Speed is a great action thriller starring Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. It moves quickly. It's got really punchy dialogue because Joss Whedon didn't pass on the script.
Pop quiz. You have a hair trigger aimed at your head. What do?
And it's aged great. It's also one of the very first rated R movies I saw in the theater, so it has a special place in my heart. Therefore, I was so excited to go see Speed 2 Cruise Control opening weekend. It came out June 13th, 1997. The date on that is very important. We're going to loop back to this month later on in this video. And even as a dumb high schooler, I went to go see this movie and left so disappointed. And I didn't have the vocabulary to exactly articulate, wasn't working, but very clearly it was Hollywood trying to force a sequel where one didn't make sense, in particular because Keanu Reeves didn't return. And so they took the lady that's not the action hero in the first movie, she was just the lady that got stuck driving the bus, and made a franchise out of her, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So this is one of these movies that even as a young person, or one of the movies as a young person, that made me realize, wait, Hollywood can make bad movies? Oh no, sometimes they're just milking it for more money? and my cynicism began. Number 7, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now, the original X-Men helped to kick off the modern era of comic book movies, and a big part of that was the casting, and the big breakout star of that film was, of course, Hugh Jackman, who did a great job of capturing the energy and the vibe of Wolverine, and Wolverine, of course, is a fan favorite, so when they decided to start doing spin-offs, it was only natural that they would go toward in that direction and give him his own movie. Also, the Weapon X storyline in the comic books is really cool stuff. Some of my personal favorites I love origin stories, and so because he's a little bit more this anti-hero, it's kind of interesting. He's mysterious. So I went to go see this movie, optimistic, and I remember sitting in the theater bored. And I'm not a person that gets bored in the theater. I remember going struggling to stay awake, which is not a problem that I normally have. Just the movie was such a bland take on this material that was tonally uneven. Special effects seemed unfinished. And it just seemed like they found entirely the wrong angle for everything that they were trying to do with it. And so even the very first time I watched it, I was like, what is this? And I'm a sucker for watching a movie in the theater. And even I was like, this is not a good movie. And it was a date night too. So it was a whole multiple levels of disappointment. Then we have The Predator. Now, like most people my age, I'm a massive fan of the original Predator starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and directed by John McTiernan. But since that movie came out over 30 years ago, seems like they've really struggled to continue the franchise, and almost all the movies that they've put out have been massive disappointments. So when they announced that Shane Black was going to be the person that was going to write and direct this film, I got really excited and interested because this is the guy that wrote the Lethal Weapon movies. He actually acted in the original Predator. I was so excited about this movie's release. In fact, it came out about 2 years ago to the day that I'm shooting this, which was right after my baby was born. My wife was still in the hospital with the baby. The baby was still in the hospital, and I left them there to go watch this film in the theater. That's just how excited I was to see it. And the movie I got was a bizarre mess of a film. Whatever went on behind the scenes with this film, it is a cobbled together mess of nonsense. There's multiple articles written about how the entire second half of the film was reshot and re-edited and redone in ways that it's unrecognizable to the movie that we got versus what was originally scripted, and you feel that while you're watching the film. I couldn't believe really what I was watching. Still not believe that this got released in theaters, and don't know how Shane Black made something so bad. But of the ones on this list, it's one of the more interesting disasters and disappointments. Number 5, Batman and Robin. So the original 1989 Batman was a huge part of my childhood and was one of those movies that helped me love going to the movies, getting into fandom and nerd culture, and I started collecting the toys. My sister and I would ride our bikes to the comic shops, and for me, all of it kind of went back to that original 1989 Batman. So that series of Batman films was very important to me, and I actually really even dug Batman Forever, even though it started having the neon lights and nipples on the Batsuit. I still had fun with that film. And then June 20th, 1997, 1 week after the release of Speed 2 Cruise Control, I went to go see the 4th film in this franchise, and once again, my childhood naivety, my innocence was shattered as I realized, wait, sometimes Hollywood really screws things up. And I remember watching the beginning of this movie, and they have ice skates shoot out of their boots, and they have bat credit cards. I was like, how is this a thing? What went so wrong with this movie? And and on the one hand, looking back on it, it seems like Joel Schumacher made the movie that he wanted to make. He just came up with an idea that nobody actually wanted to see, and instead we got this total disaster. And this would also be the one where the first time that I noticed that a movie was way far off from the comic books, because I remember when they did the Nightfall storyline and Bane and how big of a deal he was. That was right when my sister and I were going to comic book shops all the time. So they had Bane in this movie. I was like, this is not Bane. What are they doing? How are they screwing this up so bad? And I discovered that sometimes Hollywood does things just to make money and to sell toys. Next up is the Star Wars sequels. Now, I've always enjoyed and defended The Force Awakens. I think that J.J. Abrams gave us a nice nostalgia fest that's a fun roller coaster ride in the world of Star Wars that I enjoy. But when you look at these three movies as a whole, as a trilogy, I don't know how anyone can't leave without an utter sense of disappointment. It's non-cohesive. They clearly had no plan. It doesn't pay off very well. And as many of my peers have stated about it, it's a trilogy where it feels like each subsequent film actively resents the previous film inside of the trilogy and actively works to undermine what the previous film set up, thus leaving you with this inconsistent mess of a trilogy. And it's also tough when you have Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and more of the cast openly stating that they didn't have a plan, that they feel used and taken advantage of. It just puts a really nasty, bad taste in your mouth. Very clearly, Rise of Skywalker was a reaction to the poor reception of The Last Jedi. The more I think about it, the more time passes, the more I just look at it being like, how did this happen? Real quick before I give you my top three, remember to share your picks down below in the comment section. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, remember there's a companion video to this over on my Patreon page with 10 more of the most disappointing movies to me. Once again, if there's something that you felt should have been in this video, is probably in that one. In dishonorable third place is The Matrix Revolutions. Now, the original Matrix is one of the great sci-fi action martial arts films of all time that just seamlessly pulled from so many different inspirations, whether it be anime, kung fu action movies, kung fu martial arts movies, from philosophy, and intertwined them together in a story that was compelling, it was innovative, and it was entertaining and told a great hero's journey throughout its runtime. The second film tried to up the stakes with the action. I enjoyed where they were going with it for the first 2/3 of that movie, and then you get to the third act and it does a total WTF moment, tries to deconstruct everything we thought we knew about the world of the Matrix, turns it on its head, and they wrote themselves into an absolute corner to where the third movie is just unbelievably disappointing. I left the theater, the third one, just not even liking the original anymore. I went about 10 years without watching the original Matrix because I was so disappointed by the third film and where it took the characters and how all of the things that I was excited about in the first film undermined all of that with the second and third films, and the third one in particular just not landing the ship. Close out to a trilogy so bad that it made me not like a classic of the genre. Our runner-up is Justice League. Now, I absolutely love the DC characters, so the idea of a Justice League movie where finally we're seeing them unite on the big screen in live action with a massive, massive blockbuster budget had me so excited for the potential. Then all sorts of behind the scenes trouble happened, so I went into the theater, not sure what to make of it. My expectations had been tempered by the time I sat down in the theater based off the initial reviews for it. And I just left thinking like, how did they make such a blah movie? How did they suck all the energy and life out of such great characters? That I just look at this movie as kind of an abomination of studio interference, really bad ideas, and an unbelievable mismatch of replacing Zack Snyder with Joss Whedon, that it just, how little sense that makes. It's astounding that that's something that took place. And so the existence of this movie was so disappointing to the studio itself that they've actually decided to go back and admit they embarrassed themselves and allow Zack Snyder to finish his movie and him giving him tens of millions of dollars to do it just to like try and hide the fact that this movie exists and hopefully replace it with something better that's less disappointing. But coming in at number 1 is Alien 3. I've said it many times before, but this is the movie that I hate the most. It's not the worst movie ever made. There's certainly no shortage of professionalism in so much of the way it's done. It is, of course, a David Fincher film, but the basic premise of this film I absolutely hate. And it commits the ultimate sequel sin to me, which is to have a sequel that kicks off that its basic premise undermines the victory of the previous film. And that's what happens with this film. I love the movie Aliens, and it's all about this journey that Ripley is on to rescue Newt, and they escape. There's this moment of hope, and all of that is undone instantly in the first 10 minutes, so that you realize that everything that you felt victorious at the end of that film is meaningless. It's undone while people are asleep in the next film. And I cannot believe that they chose to do that. It's gross to me, and it just makes me hate this film right out of the gate. It's such a disappointing thing to do, and so it takes one of my favorite movies of all time, and it gives me the movie that I hate the most right afterwards. So it, of course, is my number 1 most disappointing film of all time. Remember, you can find that companion video with 10 more most disappointing films for me over on my Patreon page at that link down below. You can find more content from me right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.